every school-age child in Arizona, with over $1 billion increase in education funding. As we work together across the political aisle, across chambers, and across branches of government, we agreed that we would ensure that money was available to support our students next spring. Governor Ducey promised to call a special session this year so that we could finish our job by waiving the AEL. Without doing so, we knew that over $1 billion of the money we appropriated would sit untouched, because although the money would be in their accounts, they wouldn't have the authority to spend it. Instead, school budgets across the state would be cut over $1 billion in the last semester of the school year. We were promised that wouldn't happen, and as a result, we promised school leaders it wouldn't happen. Both the governor and lawmakers have encouraged schools to spend the increased funding on special education programs, tutoring, teaching salaries, and other interventions to help students succeed. At our urging, many have done so. Without an immediate special session, they are going to have to start making plans for how to cut $1.4 billion from their budgets in the last 3 months of the school year. Such sharp funding cuts would be unconscionable. Students who are only now beginning to recover from COVID-related learning loss would be in danger of early school closures, being returned to online learning, huge class sizes, and inevitably a backward slide in the progress they are making towards recovery. We cannot allow our children to fall behind yet again. Governor Ducey has lately been touting the many promises he has made and kept, and he's right. Under his leadership, we have invested in education, cut taxes, and reduced business regulation. The state is in an infinitely better position than it was when he took office. It's now time for him to keep one more promise. The promise he made to legislators that agreed on the budget with the condition that he would call a special session. It's time we as legislators keep the promise we made to Arizona's parents, teachers, and most especially children. Before we leave office, before the end of the year, we've done as the governor's office has asked, reaching out to legislators and leadership to ensure we have the votes we need to pass the AEL waiver. That list was given to the governor's office in October. These votes have been confirmed and reconfirmed before and after the election. We have the votes. All we need is for Governor Ducey to follow through on the promise he made, to be a man of his word and the leader he was elected to be. We call on Governor Ducey to call a special session immediately so that we can waive the aggregate expenditure limit and keep schools from needing to cut $1.4 billion from their budgets in the last 3 months of school. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Senator Sean Bowie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Bowie. I'm State Senator for Legislative District 18. There's been a lot of speculation in the last couple months about what happened during budget negotiations and what was promised or not promised relating to the aggregate expenditure limit. As someone who was a part of those negotiations, I want to set the record straight. If you rewind back to June of this year, the votes were not there to pass the state budget. We were coming close to the end of the fiscal year, and there were serious conversations about passing a skinny budget instead. Senator Paul Boyer and I worked closely all session, along with several of our colleagues here today, to get the bipartisan budget deal done. For Senator Boyer and me to get on board and get the budget the 16 votes it needed to pass in the Senate, we demanded 3 things: additional K-12 funding, additional funding for our state universities, and a fix for the AEL. We got the first 2 things, including nearly $1 billion of additional ongoing funding for our public schools. Before we would get on board, I told the governor's office repeatedly that we needed a fix for the aggregate expenditure limit for the next school year, so our public schools would have the certainty they needed to use those dollars that we allocated for them in the budget. I was told by the governor's office that a legislative fix during session was not tenable due to the then ongoing lawsuit over Prop 208. We needed to wait for the ruling to be released before we could lift the AEL cap. Offering a compromise, we suggested that the governor call a special session on the AEL after the ruling was released. They agreed to this, and once we had this commitment, we committed our votes for the state budget. We passed the budget later that day and into the following morning. In securing this commitment, I wanted to know that this promise was coming from the governor directly. I asked a member of the governor's senior staff, is this promise coming from the governor directly? They said yes. It's worth emphasizing, this historic bipartisan budget deal that we secured earlier this year with nearly $1 billion of additional ongoing funding for our K-12 public schools would not have happened without this promise. This budget required Democratic votes to pass, and our caucus would have never supported it without this promise from the governor. Later tonight, the governor is holding a dinner to celebrate all the accomplishments during his 8 years in office. He will no doubt highlight the historic investments secured in our bipartisan budget this year, including investments in our state's water future, infrastructure, and most importantly, education. None of these would have happened without the promise he made to lift the AEL cap. His legacy will be diminished if he fails to hold up his end of the bargain and fails to keep his word. Governor Ducey, all we're asking you to do is to do your job and keep your promise. Not only to those of us standing here, but to the over 1 million Arizona students in our K-12 public schools who will be impacted if we don't lift the AEL cap. Call us into a special session today and let's get to work. Up next is Superintendent John Scholl from the Chino Valley School District.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is John Scholl, Superintendent of Chino Valley Schools. Chino Valley Schools is in north central Arizona, about 400 square miles, 2,400 kids. We have 4 schools, pre-K through 12. Our cut with the aggregate expenditure limit is about $3 million, 17% cut to our budget with 20% of the school year left. The only way to manage that would be to lay people off. That $3 million in our community would be devastating when you consider the purchasing power of that at about $21 million. Pulling that out of the community would be a devastating blow to Chino Valley and Paulden, which is another community that we serve. We are the largest employer at 300 employees. The other thing is we ask that we take care of the aggregate expenditure limit now, because doing it in January and February is disruptive to the educational process. It actually hurts kids' education. We have employees that are worried if they're going to have a job in 2 months. They're not at their best. This is the prime time for learning, and we would like to get this done now. We have the legislature that's currently in place that appropriated this money. We're asking the same legislature to pass the aggregate expenditure limit waiver so that we can actually spend the money the rest of the year. Again, I want to ask that Governor Ducey call the special session so that we can get this taken care of now instead of later when it's going to do more harm. Thank you. Our next speaker is Representative Joanne Osborne.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to come at this at a little different direction. I'm Joanne Osborne, State Representative for the current District of 13. And this message is to the parents of Arizona, because we as a legislature, the governor, have listened to the parents of Arizona and what they've asked for. And that's exactly what we took care of in this legislative session. Not only did a portion of our parents ask for universal ESA scholarships, we did it. We are the nation's leader, and congratulations to Governor Ducey for his award of the Thomas Jefferson Award, not only for his tax cuts, but also for universal ESA of school choice. But we also had the parents of Arizona ask for more funding for their public schools. They asked for more help with special education. They asked for more help with career and technical education, and they asked for teachers to be paid more. That is what our parents have been asking for, and we did that. We had an incredible budget that was trying to take care of every single win that these parents had asked for, and that's what we've done. Now, I'm a private business owner, and when I have to budget, I know there's no guarantee on revenues, especially when you're a retailer. We don't know that. We don't know how the economy is going to go. We don't know our exact revenues, and we have to be creative. We're not government and we're not school districts. School districts know this is the exact amount of money that I'm going to be allowed to spend. So what are my programs going to be? Can I give my teachers raises? Can I take care of things that we know are going to help our children read, write, and do better in math? But see, right now, because we have not raised that expenditure limit, they don't know where they're going to be in a few months from now. So my request is that we come together, the legislature that put this budget together, that appropriated all that money for the parents' kids in our state, and we allow them to spend that money. Thank you for being here today.
Good morning. My name is Mike Wright, and I serve as a superintendent in rural Arizona. I've been asked to make a couple remarks about this pending crisis and what it means to rural Arizona and the children that attend its schools. Foremost, our ask is this: is Governor Ducey, please perform on your promise, and that is call a special session and make good of getting the state lawmakers together to vote on this aggregate expenditure limit. We need your help. We need your help. I also want to let you know, setting all the adults aside and setting the politics aside, the kids are going to be the ones that suffer. Fewer teachers, fewer programs, fewer support, less certainty. Kids are going to be the ones that suffer. In our areas, especially counties of Apache and Navajo, are among some of the poorest in the country. We provide supervision, we provide free and reduced meals and supports that children otherwise would not get. I think a majority of people agree closing schools bad for kids. We don't want that. We face deep budget cuts, in-school year layoffs next year, and possible closures. We do not have the money to come up with an extra 17 to 20% inside the last quarter. That cannot happen. Again, I've heard it said this: you can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to show up. Governor, we need you to show up and help us. We need you to call for a special session, resolve this matter. I'd like to introduce now Christine Marsh.
Can you tell us, before you, what district do you serve?
Blue Ridge Unified School District, Lakeside, Arizona.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Senator Christine Marsh, and I am in my 32nd year as a teacher in a public school, obviously part-time now. Our schools, the fact is that our schools are facing catastrophic and chaotic fiscal cliff and are unable to allocate money that we, the legislature, appropriated to them. And I want to stress that we, the legislature, appropriated this money that our school districts are not able to spend. At the same time that this is going on, our public schools, attended by 85% of Arizona's children, face the highest class sizes in the nation, the third lowest per student spending, and a teacher shortage. Meanwhile, the legislature and Governor Ducey are refusing to allow schools to spend money that we already gave them. What is the point of giving our public schools money but not allowing them to spend it? It's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of our students, of our schools, and it's a betrayal of legislators who voted for what some of us considered a less than ideal budget, with the promise that there would be a special session to address the AEL. If the AEL is not addressed, our schools will be unable to spend roughly $1.5 billion, and this will hit close to home for every Arizonan. But to give just a few, in fact, just 3 examples, Phoenix Union is set to lose $52.6 million. Tucson Unified is set to lose $66.1 million. And Scottsdale Unified, which is where I currently teach, is set to lose $28.4 million, which represents the last 6.5 weeks of school. And I could go on and on. Every single district in Arizona will see budget cuts this year. So I must ask, what is it going to take? Will it take some of these rural districts and schools closing early or laying off teachers, for this to actually come to the fore and be addressed. It's time that we act with urgency to address this funding cliff that we have set in place after we appropriated the money for our schools. And it's time for Governor Ducey to step up and call a special session for the AEL. Our kids and our schools and our families deserve that and so much more, but at the very least, they deserve that. Thank you. And I get to introduce Representative Jennifer Pollock.
Good morning. I'm State Representative Jennifer Pollock. I represent the current District 17, which is Chandler, Gilbert, and Sun Lakes. I taught kindergarten through 6th grade for 17 years, and now I teach for one of our state universities. During the past 2 years, I served as ranking member on the House Education Committee. A year ago, last November, we began discussing the Aggregate Expenditure Limit. We introduced bills to temporarily lift the cap. We introduced bills to reform and repeal the AEL. Just days before the April 1st deadline, the Senate joined the House in temporarily lifting the cap so that schools could spend the money that they had been allocated. We find ourselves in the same situation today. You heard this morning about the historic bipartisan budget we passed in June. You heard about the promise to address the AEL that was part of the budget negotiations. And you've also heard that we do have the votes to pass the bill with a 2/3 majority. We obviously need a twofold solution. In the 56th legislature, we must pass a permanent AEL reform so that schools can budget their allocations without fearing major cuts to their budgets in the fourth quarter. We are currently working on drafts that will be introduced shortly. But right now, we must address the situation at hand. We cannot allow our district schools that serve about 85% of Arizona's children to cut 18% of their budget in the fourth quarter. We cannot allow widespread layoffs and even larger class sizes. We ask Governor Ducey to call a special session to honor the promises that were made during budget negotiations. We want to temporarily lift the budget cap now. Let's give our schools the stability they need to finish the school year successfully. Thank you for coming today, and we are happy to take questions.
Hi, Michelle, come on down since you're the kind of ranking person here. You are.
I don't know if I am. Okay.
President Lame Duck.
Great.
I keep hearing people say we talk to people in the governor's office. Have you or anybody actually talked to the governor?
I have not.
Okay. So tell us who you talked to, who we can come back and say, you promised.
Who did I hear the promise from?
Well, yeah. Who did you get?
Would be his deputy chief of staff.
Sorry.
His deputy chief of staff, Katie Ratliff.
Okay. So the other part of it is you say you've got 20 and 40 on your list, but I've also heard people say we'll come in, but we also want other issues addressed, including school accountability, which has nothing to do with this or semi to it, and we also, while we're here, we need some election reform. Do you believe you've got 20 and 40 for a clean bill without all the rest of this?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we do. The people that we have talked to have confirmed that they are a yes on the AEL regardless. Now, some of those would like to have some other things happen. And I think many of the people that are yeses on the AEL would be willing to have discussions about what else could be in that special session. At the end of the day, the people that are pushing other issues have to have the votes as well. And as far as I know, we have not seen the votes on any of those other issues. But for the AEL, we do have the votes.
For a clean bill, not
Yes.
I know you have the votes, but look, this is I came up here in '82. I've seen this game. Well, I'll vote for your thing, but it just happened to be, Senate Bill 1003 or something like that. You have 20 and 40 who will say that if the thing is put up, even if nothing else happens, they will vote for this.
Yes. It has to be. You can't get to 20 and 40 without it being bipartisan.
At this point, could Representative Bowie also tell us who you spoke with? You said you actually made it a point to go back and say, is this really a promise? Who was it you spoke with?
The same, the governor's deputy chief of staff. And I was worried that something that like this might happen. So I was very clear. I want to hear this coming from the governor directly. Is this coming from the governor directly? And they said yes.
Chief of Staff Daniel Ruiz tells me that the promise relied on three conditions: Prop 208, the appeal process related to Prop 208 passing, I guess, being in the real year, and third, that there would be votes first.
Yeah, so the ruling came out over the summer. The 21-day appeal period has passed, and we have the votes.
It seems there's a lack of communication now. The governor's office saying we don't see the votes, and some here saying, yes, we have the votes. What's happening? What's going on?
They have the list of votes. They've had it since October. We're ready to go into a special session. We're ready for the governor to keep his word and keep his commitment and call us in. Obviously, there are logistics, trying to get everybody here on the same day in December, the holidays, people traveling, but we're all very committed to come in and do the work that we need to do. Obviously, and I think this was mentioned before, we would love to have a permanent repeal of the AEL. That would require the voters to approve that, so that would be a referral. But at least a one-year extension of lifting the cap, like we did back in February for this current school year, another year cap for the upcoming school year.
Well, doesn't that raise an interesting question, which also means that you couldn't take it to the ballot till 2024. We're going to have to play this game again in 12 months from now?
Well, again, our ideal is at least a year. We would love 2 years, but the discussion back earlier this year was around at least a one-year extension on the AEL.
Can you share your list with us so we know which lawmakers have committed?
I'm sure we can get back to you and talk to you about that. Yeah.
That's not an answer. The question was, will you share the list? Not will you get back to us?
I don't have it on my personal possession, but I'll talk to the folks that do, and we can get back to you.
Okay.
I'll let Representative Udall take that one.
Yeah, so when we asked them whether or not they supported it, we did not ask them if we could share their names with the press, so we're not going to do that without their permission, obviously. We have a couple we need to contact to ask that question before we could share it.
And I want to get to one other point, which is this last week, Representative or Majority Leader Toma, he put in a op-ed, and he specifically said, you know, the state and local spending allocated more than $11,000 per pupil. He used that number, right? But that number also includes building new schools and repairing schools. So it's not really representative of per pupil spending. And this is the majority leader. And what I've experienced talking to many legislators here is they don't seem to truly understand what per pupil spending boils down to. Is there a problem here of just legislators having the basic facts of how funding works and they don't understand the urgency?
I think school funding can be very complicated, and what one person means by per pupil is not necessarily what another person means, obviously. And even from state to state, when we see the comparisons, they're not always comparing apples to apples. So obviously that money is still spent on education, whether it's going into the facility or not. So technically it is part of the funding for education. So I would say there are some who do not understand school finance or understand that the cliff that we're facing, but I think for the most part, most of them understand how important this is and are trying to leverage it for something else, or have problems with our public schools, or whatever other reasons they have decided they are against it.
What about the leadership? President Mann and Speaker Rusty Bowers, have you been in touch with them? Because President Mann is also telling us that the votes are coming.
So we have been in touch with both of them. We believe we have the votes.
So if you believe you have the votes, then what's the hang up?
We need the governor to call the special session.
What is your sense of why he has not done that? We've had indications that he doesn't think the votes are there.
And they have told us some of that, the same thing, but they have not given us anyone on that list that has told him that they were a no after telling us that they were a yes. So we have asked for that information, and we have not heard anything of the sort.
So maybe I'm missing something here. I thought you guys could call yourselves in with the 2/3 vote. So if you've got 2/3
So
and the lame duck governor won't
that
do it.
is accurate. We can call ourselves into a special session. The problem is when the legislature calls this special session, the topic is completely open. And so many that are willing to vote yes in a special session on the AEL are not willing to risk calling ourselves into a special session where who knows how off the rails things could get.
I realize there's a bipartisan group of lawmakers here, but there are no Republicans from the Senate here. And Senate President Fann's response to me today, seeing that she's in favor of this, but she's got a couple of lines of strings attached to all of this. And it was no secret during the last session that Republicans, frankly, your party, love the idea of having a hammer over the head of the teachers, the unions, the Democrats, as it related to passage or anything related to lifting the AEL. Are you really facing that today? Isn't that still out there?
I think that's part of it. But the people that we have talked to that said they're a yes are a yes regardless. Look, a lot of us would like to see higher performance in our schools. Our students are still recovering from what happened a couple of years ago, and we'd like to see better performance, and we want to work on that, and we want better accountability. But the people that we have talked to and have said that they are yes have not listed that as a condition.
And you have the numbers in this Senate.
Yes.